Hello, BookTube. Well, it's May, and that's time on BookTube for TBRs, for videos where everybody talks about what they're going to read in the upcoming month and how much fun it's going to be, the plans they're going to make, the read-alongs they're going to join in on. And I like to join in on the fun as well of making such videos. It's complicated logistically for me. Because all I do is read. So I don't work it in among other things. It's my whole life. And in the month of May, I plan on reading well over 100 books, which is obviously more than I can put in a TBR. So what I usually do on this channel is a TBR-BY, a to be read by you, where I make 10 recommendations of books that are coming out in May that I can recommend to you. And this is a video to do that, and this is take 4. This is take 4 of such a video, which is unheard of, unprecedented on this channel, where I've had to do this 4 times. And you might wonder, well, okay, why on earth would you need to do that? Even twice, much less 4 times. It's just a TBR. You talk about forthcoming books literally every day. And this is true. Every single time that I've tried to make this video, I have reached a point and gone off the rails into a rant of increasingly long duration. And I am not going to do that this time. I am not going to do that this time. I'm going to include, I have a list of books here. They are set up by category. I am not going to change those categories. I am just not going to go on that rant. That's all there is to it. But fortunately, we have a few categories to do before we get there. So we shall see if I'm going to go to take 5. And the first category that I want to do is history. And there's a ton of great history coming out in May, all across the spectrum. I want to concentrate not only on World War II, which is a favorite subject of mine, but also one aspect of World War II, D-Day, the massive amphibious assault on Hitler's Festung Europa. It achieves its 75th anniversary in 2019, amazingly. And I want to recommend 3 books on D-Day. Very narrow focus, but we have all the rest of my videos to deal with the whole of history. So the first one I want to deal with, I think we've seen a lot of these books, not just in this category, but in all of them on this channel before. First one I want to recommend is Alex Kershaw's The First Wave, which, as its title indicates, is mainly his person-by-person, minute-by-minute account of the first guys to storm the beach at Normandy. He interviewed all of them that are still alive. He went through tons of original documents for all the ones that aren't, and produced a book that is very moving. I mean, a book like this would be very moving anyway, but the next big anniversary for D-Day will be 100 years, the 100th anniversary of D-Day, when there will be no original survivors. So this is a noteworthy book of its kind. It's also very grippingly done, so I wanted to recommend that. I also want to recommend Peter Caddick Adams' big book from Oxford University Press that's called Sand and Steel. It's a follow-up to his big book called Snow and Steel about the Battle of the Bulge. This one is his account not only of the D-Day assault, but of the operation itself, the assault on France, on occupied France itself. And Caddick Adams is great. He's just fantastic. Don't miss his book on the Battle of the Bulge, but definitely this one as well. Oxford hardcovers are pricey, and they're not distributed everywhere, I've noticed. So might be worth suggesting it to your library if they don't have it bought already, or keep an eye out for it and maybe splurge, because it's tremendously good. And then the last one, the last of the 3 D-Day books I want to recommend is an oldie but a goodie. It's Cornelius Ryan, who was the foremost popular military historian of World War II of a previous generation. And 2 of his great books have been collected in a Library of America volume. Library of America is an archival reprint series, a nonprofit archival reprint series. I'm sure you've seen them all. They're all uniform black spines with minimal editorial intervention. You don't get a huge amount of notes usually. You don't get a huge introduction usually. And they're sewn binding. They're acid-free, bright white pages. They have a built-in bookmark. They're meant to last forever, not just your lifetime. They're meant to be a library that you can just pass on. And Library of America delightfully decided to reprint 2 Cornelius Ryan books in 1 volume. These were both multi-bestsellers. The first one is The Longest Day, and that is his account of the assault of D-Day. And it is every bit as readable as any new D-Day account that you're going to get in 2019. It's Cornelius Ryan is he has his ticks, his flaws as an author, but he is a wonderful, wonderful reading experience. And the other book in the volume is not about D-Day. It's A Bridge Too Far, about the doomed Arnhem campaign that is still the subject of historical accounts on its own, but A Bridge Too Far is the classic version, the classic account of that. And I firmly believe that if you go into this volume, this Library of America volume, just wanting to read his D-Day book, by the time you're finished with The Longest Day, you will be so enamored of Cornelius Ryan and his narrative ability that you'll move right on to A Bridge Too Far. So I want to recommend those three for history, and not just history, but D-Day. And then we'll move on to biography. This is a memoir, arguably one of two on this list, although the second one I'm not so sure about. We'll get to that at the end. But this is a memoir by Kate Mulgrew, and it's called How to Forget. Kate Mulgrew will be familiar to a lot of you. It's interesting, her biographical note has morphed over the years to mention Broadway and the decades that she's been in the industry, and maybe to downplay or even not mention at all what will always be her foremost pop culture claim to fame, which is that for 7 years she was Captain Catherine Janeway on a Star Trek Voyager, the first Star Trek female captain. A tremendous turn as that captain in a series, a franchise that is often downplayed just a little. Mulgrew is great as Janeway throughout the whole of that 7-year run, and I can understand that, because if you're a lifetime actress, you don't want to be typecast, and there's nothing that will typecast you faster than Star Trek, as the original stars of that show learned in the course of their career. I think if you're doing a job like the one she did in Voyager, you don't really have to worry about being typecast. It's still great work. But anyway, she wrote a memoir a couple of years ago, called Born with Teeth, and I went into it with trepidation, because often when a star, a celebrity, an actress or an actor of some kind writes a memoir like that, they usually have an inflated sense of their own literary ability, let's put it that way, to be nice, and they either don't get told that inflated sense is not warranted, and so they write a book that is a little bit on the embarrassing side, or they let someone else do the writing to such an extent that they're barely present at the table. And I don't know anything about the origin story of Born with Teeth. It certainly reads from start to finish like Kate Mulgrew, and it was wonderful. It was really, really good. And this next one, How to Forget, is every bit as good. It will make you forget that the narrator is famous. It's a story of her going back to Iowa to care for her parents. And it's just purely empathetic. It's just a wonderfully involving reading experience, whether she is the star of Star Trek Voyager or, somebody you've never heard of. It's tremendously good. I wouldn't want you to miss it, and I also wouldn't want you to look at it and think what I originally thought about Born with Teeth, which is that maybe this is nothing, just a soap bubble. If we've seen anything, if we've learned anything from, for instance, Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, it's that some of these celebrity memoirs can be very good. So I want to recommend that for biography. Then we'll move on to the category of fiction. I have 4 novels that I want to recommend. The first one is High Ticket. It will be reviewed everywhere. It is noticed. Is it going to be a big splash in May? It's The Guest Book by Sarah Blake. We've seen it on this channel. It's the plot is a fairly standard multi-generational family story. A house with secrets, a family with secrets, deeply intertwined with the country's history with segregation and racism. And on the surface, you've read a lot of books like that, and so have I, but this one it has the strength of its conviction. It's actually very involving. And then the next one is one we've seen on this channel. It's The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. I think it's a paperback original in May. And it's a historical novel about a woman who rides a pack horse, laden down with books in the hills of Kentucky, and she is the library for communities that live up in the hollers and don't have anything. They certainly don't have a library, but they yearn to read. And it's a wonderful character study of the woman herself, but it's also much like the Guernsey Potato Peel Pie and Literary Society, much like that book, I think consciously patterned after it. It's also a wonderful, wonderful depiction of the rejuvenative, the reclaiming power of reading. It's a great book about reading, in addition to everything else, in addition to the wonderful main character. Then the next one is in a normal world, it would be a high-profile thing for May, and maybe it will be, but I have not heard rumor of it getting the attention that I think it deserves. It's Karimora by Thomas Harris, the creator of Hannibal Lecter, the author of The Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon. This is his first novel in years, and his first novel in decades that does not involve Hannibal Lecter in any way. Instead, it involves the main character, Karimora, who comes afoul of a classic Thomas Harris villain who is on the lookout for a buried store of money. And it's an odd book. It's a very odd book. There are parts of it that I got the distinct impression I get the distinct impression from this book that in the whole time that Thomas Harris was not publishing books, he was also not writing. I could be wrong about this. I don't know anything, but the impression I get from reading the book is that the whole of Karimora was knocked together very quickly. I would say inside of a month. It bears some signs of that, but on the positive side, the overwhelmingly compensating positive side is that when it's great, and it often is, the prose is just incredible. Thomas Harris is one of a tiny handful of working American writers who can do what he does with prose, almost etched into haiku, when the mood is on him, when the material is firmly in his hand. And it is often in this book, although I would maintain, oddly enough, that the book itself is a bit of a misfire. I would argue that it is well worth your time to read. It is a very strong recommendation of mine. It will keep you turning pages. But my argument would be, maybe you won't think it's a misfire, but I did. And my argument for why is lack of practice. It goes hand in hand with the fact that I think he was not writing all this time, and certainly not revising. So I strongly recommend it. And the reason that I sound a little puzzled about its lack of attention is because if this were a Hannibal Lecter novel, it would be the only thing in May that anyone was talking about. I think that's a little unfair, but I wanted to recommend the book anyway. And the last of the fiction books that I want to recommend also gave me a little bit of reservation at the beginning. It's by Beth O'Leary, and it's called Flatshare. It's the story of a young woman who has to find an apartment, and of course they're murderously expensive, so she goes in on a sharing deal with someone who has a work shift. So on paper, it's like they're never going to see each other. On paper, the paper being a novel. Because these two people know that they are characters in a novel, they start to communicate by notes that they leave for each other, and the notes get more elaborate and more personal and more confessional, and burgeon into a relationship because these are characters in a novel. And that wasn't my reservation, because you all know what I think about the made-up stories. They're sort of built on this kind of nonsense, and that actually is extremely effectively done. So even though it's nonsense, I do very much recommend it. I did like it. No, the thing that gave me pause is that I was about 100 pages into it when I realized it's a YA novel, flying under false colors, massaged for the first 100 pages anyway, into something else. But the cover art, the pitch of the characters, the prevalence and overwhelming importance of cutesy poo interaction, all of that is not adult literary fiction. It's YA, and I've complained on this channel before about the YA sensibility creeping into front list adult fiction because the people in charge of these acquisitions and the marketing department know that YA is popular with adult readers. I don't like that in creep at all. I think it does a disservice to both YA and adult literary fiction. But even so, regardless of those reservations, the Flatshare is very good. If you see it, you will enjoy it. And speaking of YA, we'll now move on to the YA section. And the YA section is where every one of the previous takes of this video have gang a glee. And I am not going to let that happen this time. When we talk about YA, I have a recommendation for you for May. But there's also a bit of YA news, and I couldn't let a video like this go by without mentioning it, because one new release in YA in May directly involves BookTube. It is Again But Better by Christine Riccio, who is Poland and Bananas Books, the biggest BookTube channel of them all, 400,000 subscribers. Her novel at last appears in May. Again But Better appears in May. I couldn't very well do a May video without mentioning it's going to be in every bookstore in Christendom. And every time I have tried to film this video, I have become derailed by talking about her BookTube channel, which is not only the biggest BookTube channel on BookTube, but also by far the worst channel on BookTube. The arm pinwheeling, eyes in the back of the head, bot testimony, fully sponsored, totally insincere, and largely inept epitome of the very worst of the first generation of BookTube, the kind of thing that is still the calling card for the outside world when it Googles BookTube, and that I would rather not be. And every time I have made this video, I have then gone on a short rant, and then a longer rant, and then a very long rant about her BookTube channel. And what I need to remember for this take 4 is that you're not interested in that. You're interested in what I do recommend, not in what I don't recommend. There's plenty of bad stuff coming out in May. I'm not talking about any of it. I say, unfortunately, it is unfortunate. She's a debut author. I wish her nothing but the best in her career, even though I wish she would shutter her BookTube channel. I wish she would retire from BookTube. She has what she wanted now. I wish she would do that instead of continuing to make the kinds of weird kabuki videos that she does that do nothing but downplay books themselves. I wish her nothing but the best in her career as a published author, but I cannot recommend Again But Better, and so it doesn't belong in a May TBR-BY, does it? So we're gonna cut it off there and go straight to the YA book that I do recommend. It's by Sarah Henstra, and it's called We Contain Multitudes. And much like The Flatshare, in fact a lot like The Flatshare, since I would maintain they're both YA novels, it involves an exchange of letters. It's two boys in high school who are given an assignment to conduct a snail mail correspondence with each other in the way that has now faded from the world completely. And the author manages to capture the wonder of that kind of interaction perfectly. In addition to everything else that she does, the boys are very different, and they are going obviously to fall in love with each other, and their worlds are complexly done, complexly evoked. It's a wonderful YA novel. Really does everything right that YA is supposed to do. And if The Flatshare had stayed a college or a high school thing along the same lines, where two people never see each other, are forced to live together and grow to like each other, I would be singing its praises as a YA novel too. But We Contain Multitudes, not only are the boys done well and their burgeoning relationship done well, but also the idea of snail mail, what it was like to write letters and work on them and maybe revise them and then send them and then wait for a response and maybe wait with increasing eagerness for a response. I, of course, lived that world. I was deeply involved in a stack of snail mail letters every day. And the math involved, the arithmetic, the mental arithmetic. Okay, well, I sent it this morning, so it's been 3 days, so now he has it. So, okay, it's been 3 days, so he should be sending something. Okay, now it's been another 3 days, I should be getting it, and why aren't I? And you stare at the mail, you wait for it. That's all gone. That's all eliminated now that we have email. And the email is the dream come true of one element of snail mail, which is no waiting. It's instantaneous. You write it and you send it and they get it. All at the speed of light. But it removes all of those other things. There was a delectable element involved in waiting. Now, in hindsight, I can say that. I would probably not have said it at the time. And also, you living with these documents that you're writing. Most people, I wrote my letters at a shot, but most people do not. Most people would work on a letter over a few days. And that adds something that isn't present in email. And this book captures it. So it's going to be in your bookstores in May, and I recommend it. And then we're going to move on. We'll move on to romance. I have 2 romance novels to recommend. One is much more serious than the other. Both are really good. The first one is Rebel by Beverly Jenkins. This is the first book in her Women Who Dare series. It's set in Reconstruction America. And the female character, the lead female in the book, the heroine of the novel, is an amazing fictional creation who risks everything. And that's a thing you don't often see in romance novels. Often very little is actually at stake. I mean, everything is at stake. Not only her good name in society, but her physical well-being. It's an amazing combination of period romance and historical drama that Beverly Jenkins does really well. I loved this book. Can't wait for the rest of the series. And I hope that it gets her a larger audience. I always hope that her audience will grow, because her books are all so good. And the next one, though, is considerably frothier than that. It's also the first in a series. The first in a series of First Comes Love is the name of the series. The book is The Earl Next Door by Amelia Gray. And it's a great it's a great little thing. Sometimes writers will do this, romance writers will do this, where they turn the conventions on their head. Ordinarily in Regency romances, the rake, the libertine, the person who needs to be brought back into the fold of social normality is the male character. And the woman character is the one who will do that. And in this book, those roles are reversed, because the male character is the son of a philanderer who wants nothing more than domestic stability, and the female character's husband has finally died, and she is free, not to marry again and immediately resume social respectability, but maybe to take a string of lovers, maybe to be a little bit of a scandal. And they have to teach each other, but it's the reverse of the pattern that usually holds. And Amelia Gray is just, she's just so much fun on the page. That what was it called? The Earl Next Door and Rebel are very different romances, but both very enjoyable in their own way. And then we'll move on to guilty pleasures. I have a guilty pleasure that I want to recommend. Of course, in a real sense, no reading pleasures are guilty, but considering that there are going to be 20 D-Day books coming out in May, and that maybe you should read some of them. There's an element of guilt here, but that's okay. I sanction you. And the guilty pleasure that I want to recommend is a novel by Holly Peterson called It's Hot in the Hamptons. It'll be in your, I think it's a paperback original that comes out in May. And it's very much along Jacqueline Suzanne, Jackie Collins types lines, where the Hamptons, those of you who don't live in America, they are an enclave, a vacation enclave of the wealthy. Huge mansions and exclusive communities, and lots and lots, we assume, lots and lots of high-profile scandal. And this book just revels in that, with a bunch of discontented housewives who, there's an element of the plot as it develops that's slightly on the tragic side, but all of it is just so delectably sudsy that you'll just eat it up. If in the May you are in the mood for that sort of thing, you're gonna love it. It's Hot in the Hamptons is a delightful treat of a guilty pleasure. And then I want to wrap up with an oddity, something that technically falls under I mentioned it earlier. It technically falls under the heading of memoir, but it doesn't read like that at all. It reads wonderfully, but in an odd way. It's by John Glynn, and it's called Out East. It's a very arresting cover. I wish I could put pictures up here. My spirit animal for May TBR, Sarah at Steeped in Books, puts pictures up on her video. I wish I could do that. I wish YouTube made it easy to just drag and drop a picture right there, but they don't. As far as I know, they don't. So I can't. But nevertheless, I will try to remember to list all these books down below. And Out East is a story of a young man who feels forlorn. He feels just adrift on the inside, not really knowing why. And it's the book is the story of a summer that he spends at Montauk, which is not, those of you who are not from America might not know that Montauk is a weird promontory, also a kind of a vacation enclave, but with a much different vibe than the Hamptons. And he finds a sort of a shared house with a whole bunch of characters who come and go all summer long. The thing bills itself as a memoir, but the vibe is fiction. I don't know how much of it is actually documentarily true, but it's engrossing to read either way, regardless of whether or not it's fiction or memoir. And I don't know that you would know what to make of it if you just saw it in your bookstore. I'm not sure that you would know what to make of it. So I wanted to add my voice in your head. That's what my TBR-BYs are all about. They're all about me being a little voice in your head when you're seeing these things in the bookstore. So, and just in case you want to know what I thought of it and whether or not I recommend it, I recommend Out East. I recommend it to read, regardless of what you make of it. In fact, if you read it, I'd like to know what you make of it. But that is it. That is my my May 2019 TBR-BY, and I did it. I did it. I did not let the whole thing devolve into a point-by-point, video-by-video excoriation of Poland and Bananas books. I did it. That's a subject for another video, or not a subject at all. And it's also not to the point of a video like this to bring out that she has a book if I'm not going to recommend it. This video is for recommending books, so I did it. Take 4 was a charm. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead and stop this video. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.